Rolling across the American Southwest between Tucson and El Paso, the Lordsburg Subdivision has been an integral part of the Sunset Route. In part one of this two-part series, we covered the west half of the subdivision through Arizona between Tucson and Steins, just over the New Mexico state line. In part two, we continue east to El Paso as trains cross an alkali basin between Steins and Lordsburg. At Lordsburg, Arizona Eastern's Clifton branch provides access to the impressive Morenci Copper Mine, one of the largest copper reserves in the world. We will visit this fascinating operation, complete with its own railroad, the Freeport-McMoRan Industrial. A quintet of non-turbocharged GP38-2s and -3s battle a 5% ruling grade out of Clifton, Arizona. Back on the main line, long, heavy stack trains race across the desert, passing old lava flows and ghost towns. We will visit UP's busy Santa Teresa Intermodal Facility, which first opened in 2014. Finally, we will cross the Rio Grande into the West Texas town of El Paso. Our journey across the Sunset Route continues now with Union Pacific's Lordsburg Subdivision, Part 2. The Lordsburg Subdivision traverses over 310 miles between 36th Street in Tucson and the east end of UP's Dallas Street Yard in El Paso. Today we will be focusing on the eastern half of the line, beginning at the old crossing of Steins, milepost 1129.7. The grade here is 1.5%, which is the steepest trains will encounter, although there is a short section of 2.2% for eastbounds near the Continental Divide at Wilna. The Union Pacific timetable officially lists the ruling grade as 1.49% for the entire subdivision, and trains are powered accordingly. East of Steins, the double-track main line crosses an alkali flat, which was once an old lake bed, then climbs through Gary and drops down to the division's namesake town of Lordsburg. Here, the Arizona Eastern's Clifton branch jogs to the northwest for 70 miles to the massive Morenci Copper Mine, currently owned by Freeport-McMoRan. We will take a detour up the line and show you the open pit, as well as the mine's own railroad, which interchanges with Arizona Eastern at Clifton. Back at Lordsburg, the main line takes a southeast heading following Interstate 10, crossing the Continental Divide at Wilna, and on through County Line and Gage before arriving at Demming Junction. This is where the Santa Fe met the Southern Pacific. Today, the Southwestern Railroad serves copper mines in the area. BNSF also utilizes its former Demming branch from Rincon to access the UP via trackage rights. After leaving Demming, the Lordsburg sub turns again to the southeast at Aquila, passing the stations of Dona and Adin, skirting the edge of a lava flow known as the Malpai at Afton. At Lanark, trains slow as they approach the Santa Teresa Intermodal Yard. The main line splits into 7 fueling tracks, which can handle trains up to 3 miles long in either direction. Intermodal traffic for Santa Teresa enters the facility to the south. The main line continues through Lizard in a southeast heading that brings it right along the Mexican border at Anapra. At this point, mains 1 and 2 separate, each making their own crossing of the Rio Grande into El Paso. The south track is the old El Paso and Southwestern main line, while the north track, Main 1, is the Southern Pacific. They come back together at Ice House and become a triple-track main as the Lordsburg subdivision comes to an end at Union Pacific's Dallas Street Yard. Now that you know where we're going, let's get started. Heat waves dance across a vast alkali flat in southwestern New Mexico's Animas Valley which lies between the Arizona border and the community of Lordsburg. In 1880, Southern Pacific spiked steel rails onto wooden ties through this arid land in a quest to build a transcontinental rail line which would become the Sunset Route. Nearly 150 years later, a Union Pacific train glides over steel rails that are still spiked to wooden ties as it heads westward through the Alkali Flat. It will soon climb a 1.5% grade toward an old stage crossing of the Palancio Mountains, originally called Steins Pass. Founded by James E. Birch, the San Antonio-San Diego Mail Line was the first transcontinental mail route in the U.S. It operated between 1857 and 1861. Beginning in 1858, the Butterfield Overland Mail Line also ran through these mountains, choosing a route 4 miles to the north of Steins Pass through Doubtful Canyon. This was because it had a reliable freshwater supply. Southern Pacific preferred the more southerly route through Steins Pass due to its easier grade and lower elevation of 4,365 feet. That being said, trains still have to dig in for the 1.5% climb to Steins in either direction. UP 7337 is westbound out of Lordsburg. The train crests the summit and soon will be picking up speed as it drops down the 1.49% slope to the west. In the SP days, this was a 15-mile helper district which began at the bottom of the hill at San Simon. Radio-controlled engines now assist heavy trains over the many grades on this line. UP 5930 adds power and dynamic braking to the rear drawbar as needed as the train passes the old ghost town of Steins. In just a few miles, it'll be entering the state of Arizona as it continues west toward Tucson. quartet of brightly painted GE B40-8s lead an Arizona Eastern trackage rights train over Steins in a meet with a westbound stack train. The AZER services a large Morenci Copper Mine and runs on the UP for 48 miles between Lordsburg and Bowie. This train came off of Arizona Eastern's Globe branch, which runs 135 miles from the UP at Bowie to Miami, Arizona. These cars will be set out at Lordsburg, where another train will take them to Clifton for interchange with the copper mine's own railroad. It is a fascinating operation, and we'll show it to you coming up. East of the crossovers at Alkali Flats, we look back across the Animas Valley as a dust devil dances in the old lake bed. In the distance, Arizona's Chiricahua Mountains loom on the horizon. Gary is milepost 1140.6 on Main 1, and a high green on Main 2 is for UP 7950 East. This long stacked train of domestic and marine containers is running 2 by 2 as it climbs a 1% grade to Lordsburg. Two GEs led the train, and a pair of EMDs are working about a mile and a half back by remote control, all in the skilled hands of the train's engineer. Late in the afternoon, a westbound stack train rolls through Gary on Main 1 behind UP 9082. The train races toward Alkali Flats at a good clip, ahead of the upcoming grade to Steins. This country may be somewhat desolate and arid, but if you spend some time trackside, you will also discover a quiet beauty that fills the space in between trains. Near sunset, UP 5932 follows the glow of its headlights through Gary, just minutes after passing Lordsburg. During our visit to the Lordsburg Subdivision, we saw an average of 20 trains in a 24-hour period. The railroad can be quite busy with several trains fleeted one after another. But the last train's flashing rear-end device is followed by several hours of nothing but empty rails under a vast desert sky. We wonder how many ancient Pueblo people, Native Americans, Spanish explorers, or early settlers watched the sun setting over those mountains, pondering the rugged beauty of the place. On the far side of the Alkali Basin, the glint of our westbound can be seen accompanied by lights of traffic on nearby Interstate 10 as it climbs toward the old station at Steins. Arizona Eastern number 4006 slows its train as it approaches Lordsburg Junction at milepost 1146.4. The train will enter its yard at the west end of town. In a fairly quick turnaround, these cars will be dropped at the yard, and new cars will be picked up for the return trip west over the UP. Arizona Eastern's Lordsburg yard consists of a giant loop track containing cars coming to or from the Morenci mine, located 70 miles to the north on the Clifton branch. Loads of copper concentrate are shipped in gondolas from the mine to Freeport-McMoRan smelter in Miami, while loads of copper anodes, cathodes, and rod coils are shipped out. The tank cars contain molten sulfur and sulfuric acid used in the mining process. We spy a couple more B-40-8s in the yard. Arizona Eastern has 14 of these former Southern Pacific units on their locomotive roster. After entering the yard, the 4006 couples to its westbound train for Miami before dropping its eastbound cars. The westbound cars are pushed up the Clifton branch until the rear of the train clears the Lordsburg Junction track. Not a problem for these 4,000 horsepower GEs. After throwing a switch, the crew then backs the inbound train eastward to clear the junction for its westbound trip back to Bowie. Before continuing eastward, let's head up the Clifton branch and visit the Morenci Copper Mine. Located around 70 miles northwest of Lordsburg near Clifton, Arizona, the Morenci Copper Mine is one of the largest open-pit mines in North America. The Longfellow Mining Company first started an underground mine here in 1871. It was sold to Copper Queen Consolidated Mining in 1885, which became Phelps Dodge in 1917. That company lasted until 2007, when it was taken over by current owner Freeport-McMoRan. The Morenci mine covers over 68,000 acres, or 80 square miles, and produces over 1 billion pounds of copper per year, making it the largest copper producer in North America. This is a conventional open-pit truck and shovel operation, where ore is drilled, blasted, loaded, and trucked to rock crushers, where the process of extracting copper begins. The open pit is approximately 3.5 miles wide, and when completed, will have a depth of over 4,400 feet. It is one of the largest in the world. This view of the pit is taken from a public viewing area located right alongside Highway 191. This is how the mine looked in 1940. Just a few years after open pit operations began. At that time, the railroad was utilized to haul ore out of the mine to the smelter. Large electric shovels would load the ore onto air dump cars powered by Baldwin Westinghouse haul locomotives. Trains worked the open pit mine for 50 years between 1939 and 1989, when they were replaced by large haul trucks. In this image from 1942, EMD switchers belonging to Phelps Dodge handle cars at the copper mill in Morenci. Notice the SP markings on the cars. At this time, Southern Pacific owned the Clifton branch out of Lordsburg. Today, a constant parade of haul trucks work up and down the mine. Morenci has a fleet of 146 haul trucks made by Caterpillar, designated as the 793C. These massive trucks are the size of a two-story house. Just like a locomotive, they utilize a hybrid diesel-electric mode of propulsion. Their V16 diesel engines produce 2,000 horsepower, and they can carry about 270 tons of material per load. The total weight of truck and load together is over 830,000 pounds. Each of the truck's tires is 11 feet tall and weighs over 8,600 pounds. Trucks are loaded by large electric shovels, like this one on the shelf or mining bench directly across from us. From here, it is off to the crusher. Although there is nothing small about these haul trucks, they look like tiny ants working in this massive mine. A water truck is employed to keep dust down on the haul roads within the mine. Perched on the hill below the mine is the modern-day company town of Morenci. The original town was founded in 1870 and located a mile or so farther up the mountain. As the mine increased in size, the old town of Morenci was systematically dismantled and moved here. The move took 17 years between 1965 and 1982. Today, this town of around 1,500 people exists solely because of the mine. The same can be said for another town located along the San Francisco River 1,000 feet below, named Clifton. Most of the mine employees live at either of these two remote communities, which show the signs of the ebb and flow of the copper market. Tying these two towns together is the Freeport-McMoRan Industrial Railroad that boasts a maximum 5% grade and a curious assortment of locomotives that have to deal with it on a daily basis. Wearing various paint schemes of former owner Phelps Dodge and Freeport-McMoRan, the power consists of EMD GP38-2s and -3s. The lead engine, number 51, was built in 1967 and originally worked in the Morenci pit. It has the unique features of the old mine fleet, including beefed-up stairs and pilot, and reseated fuel tanks to guard against large rocks. The most obvious are the two boxes behind the cab, which are additional dust filters for the engine's air intake. If these scenes look a little dark, it is because a solar eclipse was taking place as we were filming in April of 2024. Although not a total eclipse, we did lose a stop or two of light, and it was considerably cooler for several minutes. Let's give you a quick rundown of the railroad's operations and how it works with the Arizona Eastern out of Lordsburg. As mentioned earlier, there is a 1,200-foot elevation difference between Clifton and Morenci. In the early years, oxen and mules made up the difference, hauling ore down from the mine to a smelter in Clifton. They were retired by the Iron Horse in 1879. The first was the Coronado Railroad, a 20-inch baby gauge line that grew into a rail network by 1884, connecting several mines in the area. This engine, saved from that era, is on display near the old Clifton Cliff Jail, which saw its last customer in 1906. Around the year 1900, the Detroit Copper Company built the Morenci Southern Railroad to connect with the Arizona and New Mexico line to the south at Guthrie on the Gila River. The 18-mile-long narrow-gauge line ran until 1922, hauling passengers and freight. Getting down from Clifton to Morenci required 5 complete loops of track, earning the nickname the Corkscrew Railroad of America. Today, some of the old grade, including a few tunnels, can still be seen if you take time to look. Another line, the Shannon, Arizona Railroad, zigged and zagged away from the Shannon smelter in Clifton on a winding grade that included 2 switchbacks. In the 1920s, it became the preferred route by Phelps Dodge between Clifton and Morenci. It was replaced in 1965 by the current alignment, which features a 3% grade that increases to near 5% in a couple of sections. This is what the industrial line uses today. A safety feature on the heavy grade is a runaway track, located between the steep climb up Shannon Hill and the final drop into Clifton. A hand-throw switch is lined by default for the runaway track, in case a downhill train gets into trouble. The stub track is only a couple hundred feet long and ends abruptly in the side of the hill. Not a good scenario for the crew, but that's better than a runaway train careening into the town below. In the distance, we can clearly see the steep angle of the downhill train as it descends Shannon Hill, so named for the smelter which once existed at its base along the San Francisco River. This train works between Clifton and the yard at Morenci, and is known as the Hill Turn. These trains operate Monday through Friday. As the train approaches the switch, the conductor runs ahead to throw the switch for the main. A maneuver that has to be perfectly timed so that the train doesn't have to come to a complete stop. After a quick check of the points, the conductor signals the engineer and gets back aboard. These railroaders are employees of the mine and are required to wear hard hats when outside the locomotive, since the right-of-way is on mine property. These boxcars are loaded with copper cathodes produced at the Morenci mill. The gondolas contain copper concentrates from the mine, which are on their way to the company's smelter in Miami. The tank cars brought sulfuric acid from the Miami smelter, a byproduct of the smelting process. It is used at Morenci in the production of cathodes, which are 99% copper. Clifton, Arizona lies at the confluence of the San Francisco River and Chase Creek. Spanish explorer Francisco Vázquez de Coronado first visited the area in the 16th century in his famous expedition to America in search for the lost cities of gold. History records that he was unsuccessful, as were other explorers who came later. Gold was found in the river, but it didn't amount to much. It was a prospector in the 1860s named Henry Clifton who found the treasure in the form of rich copper ore. The rest, as they say, is history, and to this day, the town, which began life as Goulding's Camp, proudly bears his name. One of the first structures you will notice is the Arizona and New Mexico Passenger Depot, which was built in 1913. At that time, community leaders were optimistic of a mining boom and expected the population of Clifton to swell to over 20,000 people, so this immaculate depot was built to fill the bill. That optimism was stifled with the stock market crash of 1929 and the Great Depression that followed. Copper prices plunged and the mine was closed for 4 years. Rail traffic virtually dried up, and the boomtown of Clifton nearly became a ghost town. The seasons of boom and bust are clearly seen in the old hillside shanties and narrow Main Street. We are standing at what is left of the Arizona Copper Company smelter, which ran in Clifton from 1874 under the Longfellow Copper Mining Company to 1913, when a more modern smelter was opened 2 miles south of town. A stub track ends at the old smelter site, and a small switching yard sees a lot of use as the Arizona Eastern interchanges cars here with the mine's railroad. After dropping this morning's train at Clifton, the light power heads toward the junction to wait for the Arizona Eastern. The engines come to a stop, having cleared the switch at the base of the 5% grade out of Clifton, known as the ramp. Soon the Arizona Eastern arrives behind a pair of B-40-8s, number 4001 and 4002. The train, consisting of tank cars, crosses the San Francisco River on a through-truss bridge. As soon as the Arizona Eastern comes to a stop in the yard, the FMI train goes to work, tying on to the first 25 cars. Due to the heavy grade, the crew will have to make several trips between Clifton and Morenci. An operational headache, but good for photographers, since it is nearly impossible to chase this train up the hill. As the first section departs, the non-turbocharged DMDs really sound good climbing the hill. Having passed the runaway track, the uphill train gets a slight reprieve as it passes through a cut near the bottom of Shannon Hill. Looking down from Shannon Hill, we can see a black rocky mass to the right of the train. That is actually slag from the old Shannon Copper Company smelter, which operated from 1901 to 1920. After blowing for the crossing of Copper Verde Lane, the stiff grade of Shannon Hill soon begins. The hill turn is now on the final leg of the 1,000-foot climb to the yard at Morenci. At the top of the steep grade is the Morenci Yard, where cars are switched for either going to the mine or down to Clifton. During our visit, we saw the hill turn make as many as 3 trips in a day. After dropping inbound cars at the yard, the hill turn heads back to Clifton for its third and final run of the day. Dynamic brake fans whine as the old EMDs strain to hold back the train's momentum on the mountain grade. A second crew works between the yard and the Morenci plant. Setting up to get a shot of that train, we happen to surprise a few mountain sheep on the slope above the tracks. This must be their favorite train watching spot as well. 4 more Jeeps, including FMI number 56, 50, 53, and 49, lead 10 empty gondolas to the mine to be filled with copper concentrate for Miami. Meanwhile, back at Clifton, the Arizona Eastern crew is done with their switching duties and prepares to take their outbound cars south to a small yard 7 miles away called South Siding. The Clifton branch departs town above the San Francisco River on a 2% grade with numerous tunnels carved through the rocky cliffs. Getting closer to South Siding, the 4002 lugs its train away from the San Francisco River toward a new course following the Gila River in the miles ahead. The train slows to a stop as it nears South Siding. After doing some switching, another crew will take the train to Lordsburg. Back at Lordsburg, AZER 4012 is ready to head back west over the UP for Bowie. The train disappears over the hill as it nears Gary. Sometime later, a westbound manifest train led by UP 9662 climbs the grade out of Lordsburg on its way to Tucson. Southern Pacific arrived in Lordsburg from the west in October of 1880. The town got its start as a railroad camp and grew from there, attracting merchants, miners, cowboys, and freighters. It was an important stop on the Butterfield stage and later a junction for U.S. Highway 70 and 80. In the mid-1960s, Lordsburg was the biggest gas, food, and lodging stop between Arizona and Texas, with 21 motels, 20 cafes, and 31 gas stations. The town is a shell of its former self today, thanks mainly to nearby Interstate 10, a story all too well known across America. There is a story that famous outlaw gunfighter Billy the Kid washed dishes here at hotel kitchens during his teenage years. Later, for a string of killings, he was shot by Sheriff Pat Garrett in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, at the age of 21. Western history aside, Lordsburg is somewhere around milepost 1147.6 on UP's Lordsburg Subdivision timetable. UP 2639 takes a high-priority Z train west. The business brought to Lordsburg from the copper mine and smelter warrants a local switch job that works in the yard. Cars interchanged with the Arizona Eastern are picked up by another local, which works between El Paso and Tucson. At an elevation of 4,244 feet, Lordsburg was once a crew change point on the Southern Pacific. The remains of a roundhouse tell us where SP's engine facility and turntable once stood, back in the steam era. Eastbound stacks led by UP 8835 leave what was once the Southern Pacific Tucson Division and enter the former Rio Grande Division as it continues toward the crew change point at Santa Teresa. Not too surprisingly, this is another long stack train breached by 2 DPUs. Continuing east toward El Paso, the railroad crosses a vast desert land bordered by low, barren mountains. You would never guess that this was a crossing of the Continental Divide, marking where rivers flow either east toward the Atlantic or west to the Pacific. It happens near Station Wilna, around milepost 1177. A wrecked coal hopper is the only thing of interest for several miles, lying off of Main 1 between the control points of County Line and Gauge. A pair of green signals show the one on the right, or Main 1, is for a couple of westbounds. First is UP 7978 with a 3-mile-long double stacker out of Santa Teresa on Main 1. There's a DPU hiding in here somewhere. Just east of the derailed hopper, the right-of-way is decorated with yucca, somewhat hiding UP 8787 west. Our next stop is Demming Junction, milepost 1207 on the Lordsburg Sub. Westbound Amtrak number 1 is stopped on Main 1 for passengers to board and detrain. In a situation like this, Main 2 is protected by the dispatcher, so people can safely cross a track. Demming is a connection with a former BNSF line out of Rincon, New Mexico, now utilized by the Southwestern Railroad, which serves copper mines in the area. It is a similar operation to the Arizona Eastern. In the Gladstone Purchase of 1853, the U.S. bought southern portions of Arizona and New Mexico from Mexico to provide a southern route for a railroad to reach California. On March 8, 1881, a silver spike was driven here commemorating the meeting of the Southern Pacific with the Rio Grande, Mexico and Pacific, a subsidiary of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe. It was the completion of the Second Transcontinental Railroad, 12 years after the famous Golden Spike at Promontory Summit, Utah, where Union Pacific and Central Pacific met. But because it was second, no school children ever learned the name of Demming, New Mexico. After looking around a bit, it's time to watch Amtrak depart as the Sunset Limited Texas Eagle continues west for Los Angeles. The next stops, Lordsburg, Benson, and Tucson. In a few minutes after Amtrak, a headlight appears in the west as UP 8746 approaches on Main 2. As we continue out of the junction at Demming, the railroad takes a southeast heading toward the border town of El Paso. The next 60 miles journey through a remote desert region north of the Mexican border. Miles of tangent track roll off toward the horizon with a track speed of 70 for freight and 79 for passengers. Visiting the Lordsburg Sub in the spring, we avoided the extreme heat and monsoon season that occurs during the summer months. But looking at the sky, we can't help but be reminded of this line's nickname, the Stormy. The headlight we have been watching in the distance materializes into UP 8621 West as it heads between Dona and Aquila on Main 1. The rails run through the vast, lonely desert country where everything is still, as if waiting for something under the enormous sky. What we are waiting for is announced by a clear signal, which suddenly appears on Main 2, west of Adin. UP 6418 leads another high-priority intermodal train with stacks and trailers east. Notice how quietly this train approaches on the 70-mile-per-hour track. Adin is milepost 1247.6, measured in miles away from the former Southern Pacific headquarters of San Francisco. In a world away from California's Bay Area, a large cinder cone looms to the south, part of a chain of volcanic craters and maars known as the West Potrillo Mountains. UP 7894 is westbound on Main 1 at milepost 1247. Along the south side of the mains, we find the remains of an old structure, possibly part of an SP station from a bygone era. Those who once lived and worked at Adin 100 years ago could never have imagined trains like this approaching eastbound. It is over 3.5 miles long, powered by 6 engines, 4 up front, 2 more mid-train. An aerial view shows the expanse of this desert region, which is part of the Rio Grande Rift, stretching from Colorado to Mexico. Westbound stacks head between Afton and Adin on the number 1 track. Near Afton, the railroad skirts the edge of an old lava flow called the Malpai, Spanish for Badland. This vast, barren stretch of the Rio Grande Rift Valley extends south into the Mexican state of Chihuahua. Because of the arid desert climate, Volcanic features like this are preserved for a greater length of time, thanks to the lack of erosion and vegetation found in more humid climates. The rough rock and the red sand remind us of images beamed to Earth from the Mars rover. Aside from the occasional cactus or shrub, the only sign of life was what rolled past on the rails. This stack train is eastbound. To say this country is devoid of life would be inaccurate. Where some parts of the Malpai consists of rock and sand, there are sinks and natural tanks where the desert wise can find water. Before the railroad made travel easier, one would have to know where these natural tanks were. Such knowledge would mean the difference between life and death in the desert. Corral pens constructed of used railroad ties tell us we are near the old ghost town of Afton, once a stop in the early SP years. Livestock could be shipped by rail, providing this remote community with a market it otherwise would not have had. Like a mirage in the desert, Afton is gone, outside of these corrals and the name which still appears on the current Union Pacific timetable. UP 6166 leads a 121-car manifest west on the number 1 track. A couple of big GEs finish off this train. UP 7058 East passes Afton on Main 2, en route to Santa Teresa. The Lordsburg Subdivision takes another bend to the southeast after departing Afton. The distant mountains are in the state of Texas, on the other side of the Rio Grande. An eastbound empty grain train led by UP 2575 passes the signals at milepost 1265.9, 2 miles west of Lanark. The eastbound stack train we caught at Afton waits at Lanark to enter the busy Santa Teresa terminal, now just a few miles away. It meets UP 6509 west on Main 1. Lanark is CPS 1268 on the UP timetable. Like Afton, it is a ghost town. It was once a water and fuel stop for the Southern Pacific. There was a post office here from 1905 to 1923. Today, its memory has drifted on, like the shadow of a cloud on the desert floor. A stack train led by UP 7978 slowly enters the relatively new Santa Teresa terminal. Sitting on 2,200 acres, Union Pacific's Santa Teresa Rail Facility is a fairly new addition to the Sunset Route. Opened in 2014, it is a strategic hub for rail traffic moving between Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, New Orleans, and other destinations on the East Coast. Located just outside of El Paso near the southern border, the facility serves as a major gateway to Mexico. According to Union Pacific's website, the entire facility is nearly 12 miles long and 1 mile wide. While the eastbound continues to shuffle into the container yard, a couple of westbounds are stopped at the fueling facility to change crews. The main line is split into 7 run-through tracks with fueling platforms at each end. This way, through traffic on the Sunset Route can take on fuel in either direction, and multiple trains can be fueled at one time. After fueling, UP 6246 West departs Santa Teresa on its 284-mile run to Tucson. This mixed train has a little bit of everything. These signals are control point CPS 1274. The south side of the facility consists of the intermodal classification yard and ramp, where containers move between truck and rail. Santa Teresa boasts an annual lift capacity of 225,000 containers. That number can be expanded up to 700,000 to accommodate future growth. Not surprisingly, intermodal is the #1 commodity shipped on the UP in New Mexico. In 2023, a total of 84,544 container shipments either originated or terminated in the state, split fairly evenly between the two. The other part of the equation at the intermodal yard are the trucks, which enter through a main gate on the southeast side. The intermodal ramp is located on the southernmost portion of the yard. This is where the transition between road and rail takes place. Another westbound is ready to depart Santa Teresa. UP 8323 leaves the fueling pad on track 10. That may sound a little confusing. That is because the fueling tracks are numbered 6 through 12, with 6 being the north track. According to UP, there are 100 miles of rail within Santa Teresa, sitting on 136,000 ties. And room to grow. Like all things related to railroads, Santa Teresa is a 24-hour-per-day operation. Although a UP crewman in El Paso told us it tends to be busiest at night. so we thought it was worth another visit. While a westbound waits on the fuel tracks, an eastbound autorack train led by UP 8846 slowly passes through. It will be stopping at East Fuel, milepost 1276.6. Closer to us in the container yard, a long cut of empty well cars are being switched by a brace of 4 big road engines, including EMD SD70 AHT4 number 3027, which is on the point. An ITS Con Global crew member observes cars as they pass his headlights, and he prepares to make a cut. Con Global provides intermodal yard services, including switching of rail cars. The white bars on the truck are called chassis guards, which are designed to protect the driver from accidentally driving under a container or trailer on the ramp. As darkness settles in, UP 7399 slowly departs West Fuel for a nighttime run to Tucson. We really enjoyed our time filming in the Santa Teresa Intermodal Facility, and we're pleased with how easy it was to get these images all from the side of a county road. For now, it's time to call it a night. In the morning, we will make our final destination as we continue east across the Lordsburg Sub. Welcome to the great state of Texas. 2 impressive bridges cross the Rio Grande into the Lone Star State. The southern bridge is the former El Paso and Southwestern line, while the Southern Pacific crossed the river to the north. Both bridges are uncommon in this day and age, as they utilize a pin-connected deck truss design that dates back to 1903. Along with crossing the river, both main lines also cross BNSF's El Paso Subdivision, which heads south from Las Cruces to the Mexican border. And speaking of the border, it's really easy to see just south of the crossing, giving us a look into Mexico. El Paso is the far western tip of Texas. The name comes from 16th century Spaniards who came upon 2 mountain ranges rising out of the desert with a chasm in between. They named this site El Paso del Norte, or Pass of the North. UP 7952 leads a work train across the Rio Grande into Texas on Track 2. Main 1 is occupied by a tamper and ballast regulator this morning. The train exits the bridge and rounds a bend to the south, passing the control point of Ice House, milepost 1293.5. An early morning visit to El Paso finds us at the Union Depot, which was built between 1905 and 1906. It served several railroads in its early years, including the Santa Fe, Southern Pacific, Missouri Pacific, and the National Railways of Mexico, which ran a train south to Chihuahua City. Today it still serves Amtrak's Sunset Limited Texas Eagle and Sun Metro buses. The station's office space is currently used by Texas Tech College of Architecture, which seems quite fitting. With the morning sun high over the West Texas town, UP 7681 drags a manifest east into Dallas Street Yard, located a few blocks away. Between Ice House and Campbell Street, the line goes to triple track with an additional siding for the depot designated as Track 4. The main line tunnels under downtown El Paso and emerges at the west end of UP Dallas Street Yard. This is a division point with Southern Pacific's Sunset route continuing east via the Valentine Subdivision and the old El Paso and Southwestern's Tucumcari line, which splits off to the north via the Carrizozo Subdivision. Trains routed to and from Chicago take this route, which connects with the old Rock Island line. Our final train is UP 8082 West with a long string of marine containers, most likely heading for Long Beach, California. The tamper and regulator we mentioned earlier are seen leaving the yard and will follow the train to Ice House to begin their work. We talked with the foreman on that job, a 40-plus year railroader with the SP and the UP who had spent his entire career working on the Sunset Route. Although we couldn't put him on camera, his enthusiasm for working on the railroad after all of these years was something worth mentioning. They say when you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. Well, we can say that too. Over the past couple of years, we have gotten to know several hundred miles of the famous Southern Pacific Sunset Route from West Colton, California to the West Texas town of El Paso. The sights, incredible desert scenery, and fascinating history learned along the way has made this a trip to remember. As always, until next time, thanks for watching.